Welcome to Classic Take, Season 2, Episode 19. The topic which we'll be discussing today is the surprising link between progressivism and the coming of Moshiach. We're living in a day of age that, besides everything going on in the world, I don't know, besides, or maybe one of the highlights or the causes for what's going on into the world, is that there's a different new age of ideas that are being espoused and are being discussed, and people are trying to bring about a change in how we think. And we've always had this throughout the ages. There's always been different stages and periods where new ideas were came up that changed the way the world behaved itself, the way the world thinks and lived, etc., etc. And it's fair to say, I mean, it didn't start yesterday or the year before, but we're living in a date where one of, at least in the Western world, the idea of liberalism, being liberal and progressive and all that type of mindset is very dominant, very strong. And as time goes on, the goal, the agenda is to try to change the whole value system or lack of value system from their perspective, but the value system that we've had for many generations is trying to be opposed and changed and deemed wrong by the new progressive way of thinking. And I mean, we're not going to, it's not here a discussion of different ideas, but just want to focus on what our sages tell us about this phenomenon and how it relates to Mashiach. So as I mentioned in we had a previous episode, I quoted the statement of our Chachamim at the end of Masechta Saita. At the end of Masechta Saita, our sages discuss the type of world that will exist before Mashiach comes. And our sages tell us that B'ikvos Mashiach means at the end, right before Mashiach comes. Another interpretation is in the footsteps of Mashiach, when we were so close to the redemption that we could hear the footsteps of Mashiach. Chutzpah Yiskei. Chutzpah will become great. There will be a great increase in chutzpah. I don't think I have to translate what the word chutzpah is. And then it discusses other things that will be then, the inflation, and it says Malchus tehafich leminus. The government will be turned into heretics. There will be no rebuke. Beis vad yield is nus, a place where people gather together, will be used for immorality. Mentions other things. Mentions how people will fear God-fearing people will be despised. Chachma seifrim tizrach, the wisdom of the sages will be looked down upon. Nodim pneis kenam yalbinu, children will embarrass the face of elders. Kenam yamdu mipnei ktanim, elders will have to stand up in front of small young kids. Ben menavelov, bas kama b'ima, kala b'chamoisa, a son will vilify his father, will be act very disgusting to his father. A daughter will rebel against her mother, a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. Oyeveyish anshe beisai, the enemies of a person are the people of his own household. Pnei ador ki pnei akelov, the face of the generations like the face of the dog. Haben enim ispayish me aviv, a son won't be embarrassed from his father. Val ma yeshlanu lishon alavina shebashmaim, whom do we have to rely upon in our Father in heaven? We basically see, if you put it in a nutshell, this is a complete breakdown of morality, the complete breakdown of the value system, which Jews or non-Jews, different faiths, there was a certain value system that they had, whether it was the family unit, morality, respecting elders. When before Mashiach comes, will be completely meltdown, a complete destruction of the value system which people had for generations. And this did not happen yesterday, as we discussed in a previous episode. I think it was episode 13. But it didn't happen in yesterday. It already started years ago. I mean, Ben Bas Kama Bima Kala Chamois, a daughter rebels against her mother, is actually a verse in the scriptures. Already in that time you had it. But as we progress, talking about being progressive, as we progress, this has become much more dominant. It has become much more uglier, to be blunt, about how, the youngsters reject the elders, they reject their parents, they reject whatever their parents stood for, anything that society stood for. Now, is this a curse or a blessing? Is this good or bad? Well, it really depends, as we'll soon see. But first of all, let's understand a little bit more what's going on. Why does this take place right before Mashiach comes? So there are very different and fascinating interpretations about why this is taking place. From one hand, a number of interpretations explain that this is because we are holding, as was the way expression goes, at the bottom of the barrel. We're holding by ikvasa de Mashiach. As I mentioned before, the Talmud uses the term that this will take place by ikvasa de Mashiach, by the time right before Mashiach comes, which is termed as ikvasa. Ikvasa has multiple different interpretations. Ikvasa is related with the word akev. Akev means the heel, which is why I mentioned one interpretation is the footsteps of Mashiach. When we could hear the heels, the footsteps of Mashiach, the heel is also the bottom of the body, and that's connected with the other interpretation that it's the end of exile right before Mashiach comes. So we'll have all of this. So what is the connection with Ikvasa de Mashiach? So we have a teaching of the Arizal. The Arizal, there's a sefer called Sefer Gilgulim. The Arizal discusses there the souls, the reincarnation of souls, and other concepts related to the different souls and different generations. And the Arizal basically says, he says that in the last generation, the Arizal says, Shanachnu boy, in which we are in. In other words, the last generation, there are itself has as we realize things, are not necessarily in the units of 20, 50, or 100 years. It's a time period. So the generation that Arizal is already saying in his day, we're already experiencing Ikvasa de Mashiach. He says why. So he basically explains that the way he explains it is that the Jewish people as a whole are like a body. All the souls together comprise a body. We know it says Adam Rishon, the first man. So he was a neshama klalos, a general body, a general soul. And every particular soul, until Mashiach comes, is rooted somewhere in the body of Adam Rishon. Now, Kabbalistic teaching explained that in the previous generations, the souls that came down to the world from higher parts of the body, there were souls related with the head, with the heart, with the hands. But as time progresses, as we reach right before the coming of Mashiach, so we're holding by the bottom. In other words, at every generation, there was a rectification, there was a refinement. The soul came down into the world to rectify its particular mission, its particular aspect that was affected through the sin of Adam Rishon, the first man with the tree of knowledge. He brought evil into himself, into the world, and every neshama is its job in rectifying it. Now, in previous generations, you had souls that were much more spiritually sensitive. They were like compared to the heart, to the mind, higher organs. The later generations, as we're getting closer to the finish line of refining the world, so now we deal with the real, so to say, the real lower levels of souls, which are compared to the akev, to the heel, which means that just like the heel is the least sensitive of the body, it's the most coarsest part of the body. That's why it says that the easiest part of the body to put into hot water is the heel, because it's the least sensitive. And our sages teach us, I believe it's Avos Rabbanos, and it says that the akev, the heel of a person, is the malach hamavis, is the angel of death within the person. He says that everything that's in the big world and the greater world is also in the smaller world. With the person, Elam Katan Za'adam, the person is a small microcosm of creation. So he says that same way, he goes through many things, but he says the same way you have malach hamavis in the world at large is the angel of death. What's the representation of the angel of death within the human body is the heel, because it's the least sensitive. So that Arizal says that is why he says that the souls that come out right before Mashiach comes, he says we're holding right at the bottom, and they're very lowly level, so to say. And that's why the souls are more coarse, less spiritually sensitive. And that is why this chutzpah yiske, there'll be increase in chutzpah, there'll be insolence, there'll be a complete lack for authority and so on and so forth, because we're dealing with extremely souls that are extremely unsensitive, completely unsensitive to spirituality. But that is a good sign, because that means that we're holding by the bottom with it. Once we're finished with this, so that means we're getting ready for the coming of Moshiach. That means once we finish refining even the lower souls, the last elements that remain, which are sometimes the hardest to refine, but that right away will usher in the coming of Mashiach. That is why the two interpretations regarding the words ikvasa de Mashiach, on one hand it means the end of exile, and it also means the footsteps of Mashiach. They seem to be contradictory. The end of exile, particularly according to the Arizal's interpretation, we're talking about the bottom, the lowest souls, seem to be they're like the bottom of the ladder, and then we say that it's the footsteps of Mashiach. Footsteps of Mashiach is the greatest revelation possible. So the Rebbe explains it's not a contradiction, because it's specifically through refining the lowest levels, the darkness that exists right before Mashiach comes, that we will usher in, we will hear the footsteps, we will not only hear the footsteps of Mashiach, but we'll have Mashiach himself. So the end, the lowest, is really connected with the highest. And furthermore, Chassidus always adds a positive twist. Chassidus says that in a soul that's spiritually unsensitive, it's able to have more self-sacrifice than souls that are spiritually sensitive. The Rebbe says that as the exile became darker, as our understanding and our appreciation of godliness has dulled over the centuries, the more the Jewish people have expressed self-sacrifice. When there was decrees, when there was religious persecution, so we've had self-sacrifice. In previous generations, in the time of the temple, of the Beis HaMikdash, there was here and there you had different situations where there was self-sacrifice, but in general, the Jewish people were inspired, they saw godliness, they felt godliness, they kept the Torah on their own. Because they were spiritually sensitive. When we're spiritually unsensitive, that's what brings out the deepest recesses of the soul, the deepest power of the soul, which is the power of self-sacrifice. But anyway, this is the Arizal's explanation of why before Mashiach comes, there'll be a generation of people that completely disregard everything before. There's obviously different ways this is expressed, whether it's ideologically or just in plain behavior. We're living now in what's called the I generation, the iPhone, the I this and the I that. It's all about the I, me and myself and I. And the complete disregard for any value system that, any value system that was kept before is considered as something which we have a moral obligation to get rid of, because it's unmoral to be moral. Why? Because this is a type of darkness that will be before Mashiach comes, and it might not be easy to deal with it, but when we deal with it, we try to elevate it and refine it, this will bring about the revelation of Mashiach. That's one explanation. There's another explanation which is discussed by the Abarbanel and the Maral Prague and others, discussed in many sources and various angles, various nuances, but the general idea is like this. The general idea is that between one stage and another stage, there has to be a complete recovering. You have to have a complete destruction of the previous stage. So for example, when you want to grow a seed, you want to grow a stalk of wheat, you throw a seed into the ground, the seed disintegrates. After it disintegrates, it completely disintegrates, then it's able to take root and a new beautiful stalk of wheat grows, and instead of the one kernel that was put into the ground, you now have 40 whatever kernels on this new stalk of wheat. When a person wants to, Chassidus discusses this idea a lot, the idea of tshuva, many different ideas of serving the Eibishter, or even in general, when a person wants to reach a higher stage, usually there's a state in between where he's completely lost. He reaches a point where let's say a person has a certain understanding of something, and he's trying to uncover what it really means. And the more he digs deeper, the more he's going to have questions and deliberations until he reaches a point that he feels he doesn't understand anything. And he gives up. And at that moment, all of a sudden, he'll have that flash, that idea that will hit him, with the renewed, the much deeper understanding will suddenly hit him. Why? Because you can't just go from stage 1 to stage 2 directly. In order to go to stage 2, you have to leave behind stage 1. You have to leave your previous understanding in order to be able to reach the next understanding. So while as you're going from one level to the next, you reach a point in the middle where you're stuck. You have nothing. But that is the hefset, that is the disintegration of the previous state, getting ready for the coming state. The same thing is when you're putting a kernel of wheat in the ground and so on and so forth. So the idea basically is, for better or for worse, that when the world is about to experience a completely new phase, a completely new perspective on things, there has to be a state of recovery. The previous state, the previous value system, has to be completely disregarded. So what happens is that within the world, the Barbanel, very interestingly, he highlights how every single prediction of the future, actually right before Mashiach comes, it's just the opposite. For example, he says when Mashiach will come, knowledge of God will fill the world. What happens before Mashiach comes? Our sages say that people, like I mentioned before, people will disregard the wisdom of the Torah. It says that the Talmidei Chachamim, Torah scholars, the knowledge of Torah will become diminished. They'll forget Torah to some extent. It says before Mashiach comes, when Mashiach comes, there'll be ultimate happiness, eternal joy. Before Mashiach comes, there'll be terrible suffering. When Mashiach comes, there'll be great satiation. There'll be the different verses discuss how there'll be abundance of food. Before Mashiach comes, our sages say that there'll be and then the 7 years before Mashiach comes, there'll be a hunger. And when Mashiach comes, there will be the Jewish people will be praised for, the land of Israel will be the highlight of the world. Before Mashiach comes, the land of Israel will be discussed this, and I think was episode 3 about the Galil and the Golan being destroyed. He says when Mashiach comes, there'll be peace. Before Mashiach comes, it says there'll be a lot of infighting, both amongst Torah scholars and amongst the world and the Jews. So basically he says that we find that you might expect that there should be, you're going to the days of Mashiach, so there should be a natural process. You go, things should slowly develop in a more from the state that you're in. You should start seeing some signs of the future in a positive way. Instead, every prediction of the future, he says, you really look at it, you find that our sages say that right before Mashiach comes will be just the opposite. So he basically says that the idea is that Mashiach, he doesn't spell it out exactly in these terms. Maram Prague already spells it out a little bit more clearly. But he basically says that Mashiach comes in a way that you go from one extreme to the next. In order to reach the state of Mashiach, we can't exile and Mashiach are two opposites. Exile can't lead directly into Mashiach. What happens is that there's exile. At the end of exile, there's a complete disintegration of whatever was there before, and that paves the way for a new beginning, for the coming of Mashiach. And very interestingly, the Barbanel says this following idea. He says one of the things it says before Mashiach comes was that there will be heresy. The governments will become heretics. So he actually says that there's a certain positive element in that. Why? He says the nations of the world had their own faith, which went against the Torah. He says by them losing their faith, by them completely disregarding faith, when Mashiach comes, they'll be ready to turn a new page. It'll be much for them to adjust to Mashiach. If they had their own previous faith, they're not going to be ready right away for the coming of Mashiach. But now that they disregarded faith, they completely, which ultimately means that they're disregarding whatever their fathers, their grandfathers believed in, they're becoming heretics, so to say. So that itself is not good, but that prepares them for when Mashiach comes. Okay, this is they now have a fresh mind, so to say. They're ready to accept what Mashiach wants to teach them. So this is the teaching of the Abarbanel. The Hamaral also says a similar concept. There's more to discuss, but I just want to focus on a few particular points over here, particularly regarding the idea of being liberal and progressive and so on and so forth, and its connection with Mashiach. We find that, in addition to everything else that I said before, the Rebbe also explains that in every curse there's a potential for a great blessing. So if we have a breakdown of a value system, let's say between parents and children, where children completely disregard parents, so that could have a positive use. That could be used out. That has positive energy hidden in it. What is that? That we go, children should embarrass their parents in a positive way. They should be more committed to Torah mitzvahs. They should be more knowledgeable than their parents. When we see in the world that we have these negative signs of Mashiach, there's obviously these negative signs are really just a catalyst. They're part of a system that Hashem made that the exile is ending and the Geula and the redemption is coming. We don't have to stay with the negative appearance of it. We have to dig into the positive energy that's embedded in it and tap into that. And that way we will bring about the coming of Mashiach in a much better and clearer way. So when there's the idea of dropping whatever our fathers, our elders, our wise men have taught us, completely disregarding their previous value system, it could be done in a very positive way, which means that you commit yourself to much greater heights, much greater commitment than your parents and your grandparents. So there's a positive way of doing this. So that's first of all, there's definitely a positive energy, which is the ultimate purpose of this negative phenomena that's in the world. There's another point also, which could be explained as well, which is that the Rebbe says this elsewhere. The Rebbe says that what is exile? The Rebbe says we look at exile, we see a world of chaos. We see a world that seems to be doing things that make absolutely no sense. The Rebbe says, where is that coming from? What's really happening, the Rebbe says, is that there are great spiritual lights that are being revealed, but because the world is not ready to contain it, so it expresses itself in a way that is completely chaotic. If somebody is not, the Rebbe discusses their affliction or physical affliction, even spiritual affliction as well. When there's something that's too great to be contained, so what happens is the person that's receiving it is just going to go completely haywire. He won't be able to make, he won't be able to understand what's going on. To him, it's just sheer suffering. But really what it is a very great energy. Were he to only know how to challenge the energy in the right way, he will be able to extract, he'll be able to reveal the hidden light that's hidden behind this, which is a light that's so great that's above the norm. It's a chaotic light in a positive sense. It's so great and sublime that it defies logic, that it defies any value system that existed before. So the Rebbe says exile really, it's a very interesting perspective, but exile is really the revelation of Mashiach coming into the world, and the world is not yet ready for it. So when it enters the world, it just creates chaos. What do we have to do? We have to be able to take what, as the Rebbe's terminology was, we have to take these great lights, which are uncontained, and to channel them in a contained way, channel them into appropriate vessels, into appropriate way of life. And the Rebbe says this is the role of doing Torah, with serving Hashem. There's different aspects of serving Hashem. There's Torah, the self-sacrifice, there's different things that have the power of taking something uncontained energy and channeling it into a positive sense. It shouldn't just remain an unconstrained energy, but it should help channel things into the world, channel goodness and kindness in the world, and ultimately lead to the revelation of Mashiach. So when we're dealing here, I'm not discussing a mix of different ideas, but there's definitely a lot of these ideas that we encounter today. Some of them have very ideological background. The idea of social, everybody has to be equal, and there shouldn't be any difference between countries and between peoples and all that. That sounds very nice and beautiful. It's very idealistic. The problem is that when we apply it in the current situation, we end up supporting more those that want to cause harm to other people than those that want to do good to other people. When we're being ultra accepting and we'll accept a terrorist and try to show our empathy for him, that's not empathy. That's really just helping him do what he has to do what he thinks he has to do, what he wants to do. So ultimately, there's a idealistic notion over here which could be completely misguided, but there's a spark, there's a light, or it's coming from a light, but the light has to be channeled in the right way. We have to take the shell that's concealing the light and connecting it to the right source, which is Torah, which is serving the Eibusher. So the idea of everybody being equal is a very sublime, beautiful idea. But when we apply it in this world, we just get exile, we just get chaos. On the contrary, by focusing, learning about Hashem and learning about Mashiach and what the world will be like in the way of Mashiach, in the times of Mashiach, gives us the ability to take these sublime ideas and channel them in our daily lives today in a way which actually leads to the fulfillment of this dream, but not in a way that it will just bring chaos and just going to support people that want to do harm, but on the contrary, there'll be a truly holistic, wholesome world of peace. How is that? Learn about Mashiach, learn about, you have ideal vision for the future. Yeah, Torah, God has his ideal vision of the future, which also is about universal justice and so on and so forth. But there's a way how to get there. You can't jump the ladder. There's a way how to get there. Mashiach will be the one to bring it into the world. We have our job. Each one of us could live in a Mashiach way by us ourselves learning about Mashiach and integrating the mission of Mashiach into our own lives. This way we could live that dream and make it a reality, and may it happen speedily in our days. Take it from Yad Mamish. Amen.